Hello Don, it's really an honor to have you here in the Computerspielemuseum and be able to ask you some questions. The first one is, how did it happen that you developed games even before a games industry exists? If I'm informed right, you studied English drama at that time.
So I was at Pomona College in Claremont, California, which is near Los Angeles. And it turned out that our school was one of two universities in the United States where students who were not advanced in science and math and working on faculty research projects could actually have access to a computer. A math professor had gotten a grant from a foundation, and they put a computer terminal in our dormitory.
Okay.
So everybody could use the computer, and that idea was to open the computer to everybody. And of course, at that time, a computer terminal, all I could do was print words on paper. We didn't have monitors yet, so it's printing on paper. And I was majoring in theater, in playwriting. Well, you show me a machine that prints words on paper, and then you interact with the machine and it prints different words based on what you say. If you're used to writing plays, you look at that and say, this is a very interesting machine. And games, if all they are words printed on paper, games feel like writing. So I felt very comfortable immediately, started to write games, and I never stopped.
And so have you been pen and paper role-playing player? And was that the reason why you programmed Dungeon?
Yeah, theater people were likely some of the first people who would pick up Dungeons and Dragons, because role-playing for theater people, again, is so natural. And so one of my friends who was tied into a theater group called Strut and Fret, which was there was a group of colleges that my school was part of, and they were the theater group at one of the other groups of colleges. And they said, oh, you've got to play this game, you've got to play this game. So I come to the group, learned the original D&D, and of course fell in love with it, having a great time. And then I thought, oh, wait a second, I know how to put this on the computer. And of course on the computer, it's so slow compared to doing it in real life, but I put it on the computer.
And when did you realize that it could become something commercially interesting?
You know, I didn't have that vision in the 70s when we were working on mainframes, because first of all, it was all divided. Those of us, we were on a PDB-10 computer from Digital Equipment, was the maker of it. And that's what our school had. Other schools had computers called Plato, from Control Data Corporation. And so if you were at a PDB-10 school, you saw games that were made for the PDB-10. If you were at a Plato school, you saw games that were being made for Plato. And it's only till years later we discovered, okay, we were doing a lot of things in parallel. So I didn't have a vision of the commercial side, and I didn't even know that over on Plato, at about the same time I was doing it, very logically, Plato game developers were doing the same thing I was doing on the PDB-10. We'll never know. We were probably on the same exact days doing similar things, just because if you love D&D and you could code a mainframe, there are some choices. But so that was fun, but I was stuck, I think, like many people. And you would think of, okay, what is a computer? Well, a computer fills a big room. A computer would not fit in the room we're sitting in. And it cost millions of dollars. Well, of course, you're not going to be able to get a machine that fills a big room and needs special air conditioning, and you wear a winter coat to walk into the computer room, and it costs millions of dollars. Oh yes, and we're all going to have these in our homes. It felt like science fiction. It felt like something of 50 years later. Of course, what we know is now that it's almost 50 years later. We know that it was only a very few years before it happened.
Yeah.
But I had no vision of that.
But when the Apple II came out in 77, so wasn't that something when you realized that you might be able to port your PDP-10 program to home computers?
Oh, I remember the moment. There was a guy, I was a school teacher because I knew writers starved and actors starved. So I was a school teacher, and then I became an administrator for our school. And a salesman who was selling computers to the schools, early Apples to the schools, came to our district and started talking about all the things that this machine could do. And then we're sitting there, and he's trying to sell us computers for the school, and I'm thinking, oh my God, they got a PB10 into this little box, and we can write games for it. And oh my God, everything I've been doing for years on a mainframe, I can do at home. And I probably should have thought, let's see, if I spend all my time writing games at home, my wife still want to be married to me for spending all my time on the computer? I didn't think about that part. But fortunately, we're still together many years later, but it was just like, and so I'm sitting in this business meeting, and my head is exploding because I'm thinking about it. And so, of course, went out and bought the computer, which was, the way we think of computer prices now was terribly expensive back then. And my wife supported me and said, no, I know how much you love games. Well, we put it on the credit card, and we eventually paid it off. And you get the cassette drive, and the cassette drive keeps losing your data, so then you spend all the money on the floppy disk drive. So the same cycle that so many people went through.
But then your first, if I'm right, commercial access was Utopia for the Intellivision, which is a video game console without the option to save games.
Yep.
But it was still a strategic game, which was very uncommon for home video game platforms. So how did that happen?
It will give you an idea how lucky I was. So first, I'm lucky I'm at one of only 2 colleges where I could have gotten access to computer as an English major and write games. Then, just at the moment when Mattel Toy Company starts to do the Intellivision project and they commit to it, they did a test version and then they committed to taking on Atari in the first great console wars. So they now want to build a game development team, and they start looking for game designers. I answer their ad, and I call them up and I say, I've been writing games now for many years on mainframes, but all the way back to 1971. And I think, just from the tone of voice, I think the first person I talked to thought I was lying, because nobody's been writing games for years. This is all brand new. And then they figured out, oh, there's a university scene. Oh, he's been part of this university scene. Okay. So they hired me. And I was at the right place at the right time. And on the first day of development in-house at Mattel, I was one of the original 5 game developers. And I ended up being director of game design for the Intellivision. But the first game I did, we had the video game itself, which was called the master component, which is the machine everybody's used to seeing. But there was also a computer component. And it was designed so you would take the video game console and you would drop it into this opening in this very large machine. And that would turn it into a home computer. And they knew that families saw computers as educational. A lot of Apple's marketing had made people want that kind of computer. Oh, wait a second, here it starts out as a toy that the kid wants to play with, but then it's a computer that could be educational, and parents loved that idea. So the first assignment they gave me was to write an educational game for this computer. But we had one problem. Floppy disks were too expensive for something that would be sold in the toy store, so we had to have cassette drive. And cassette drives could not reliably store data. That's why for an Apple, for a Commodore 64, everybody who had them said, the cassette keeps losing my data, I have to have a floppy. So Mattel test markets the computer. They have a few hundred of them, I think they make. My first game I think they made was called Geography Challenge. It taught the states of the United States, which were saying that were commonly taught in schools. So you would look at a map, an outline of the state, and you would have to guess which state it was. And so I think they made 125 copies, roughly, of that game to sell in the test market with the computer. But they just kept having problems with the cassette. So they said, okay, the video game is selling like crazy. The computer has problems. Don, what kind of a game would you like to do? And they would start out by saying, you might be assigned a game, but they would start out by saying, what would you like to do? Because maybe you want to do something that marketing wants that would be, they think would sell. And so I thought, well, we have lots of arcade style games, which Atari has, so we're competing there. We have lots of sports games. Atari was better at arcades. We were better at sports. We had lots of both of those kinds of games. So what can I do that's not like all those other games so it will stand out? Well, in the 1970s university scene, Sims, all of us were writing sim games. That's what the machine was good at because, again, text was what we could do. And so I thought, well, sim, that would be a logical thing to bring in. And so, I was, well, what do I do? And I thought, when I was a teacher, I taught in a school where a lot of the kids had not traveled very much. They had not seen the United States, let alone seen the world. And I was teaching social studies, geography, history. And so one day I went in the cafeteria for our school and I realized the floor in the cafeteria had squares of linoleum. Well, if you show a computer game designer a bunch of squares, you start thinking about board games. How can you etch out? Well, you can take anything and draw it at any scale if you have squares, because you transfer the squares from the paper. So I got black electrical tape and I made a map of the world on the floor of the cafeteria. And then I invented games for my kids to come and play so they could learn where is Germany, where is France, where is Japan. And they would understand, you know, oh, I have to go way across the cafeteria. That's someplace that's far away. And the kids still, I'm friends with some of them on Facebook now, years later, and they still remember playing that game. And the local newspaper did a story about it. My principal was very happy. My school superintendent was very happy because the newspaper did a story about it. So I started thinking, wow, I could take that world map game and I could put it on the Intellivision. But the Intellivision only in the safe zone of what you could show on TV because the margins could get lost. We only had about 96 pixels high and something like 128 pixels wide we could safely use. Well, you can't put a map of the world on 96 by 128 and recognize anything. And so I thought, okay. And then I remembered I'd done a silly little game called Attack of the Killer Shrews. There is a terrible old movie called Attack of the Killer Shrews. Radioactivity from bomb tests has turned tiny little shrews into gigantic people eaters in the movie. And so 6 people, I think, are trapped in a cabin in the middle of an island. The shrews are growing and eating everything. The shrews are trying to get the people. The people have to figure out how to make a run to the dock to get on a boat and get away. And of course, some people make it and some people don't. So I thought, you know, I'm a college student. I'm thinking, oh, there's a game there. Let's see, we can figure out how many shrews there are and other things for them to eat on the island and when the food will be. And you have your food and your people. You could use some of your food to help the other animals on the island divert the killer shrews. And I was thinking, well, I'm trying to make a map, but I need to bound it in an island, just like Attack of the Killer Shrews. I can use islands that are small enough. And so now I had sim game, I had a map, I had using an island to bound it. I had the traditions of simulations from the 70s. Santa Paravia and Fiumaccio, which was an old mainframe sim they had published on computers, and I'd seen that. and said, this stuff transfers. These kinds of games transfer. So I took that all together and put it into Utopia, pitched it for the Intellivision, and I think the marketing team approved it for two reasons. Number one was that, apart from the fact it was different from everything else, number one was that our hand controllers had all these extra buttons that Atari did not have. A lot of our games did not use all of the hand controller buttons. Utopia was designed to use the buttons, so it showed off our machine. And it was perfect for the game design. I mean, the Intellivision was just the perfect machine to do this game. And so because it showed off the hardware, I was talking about this in my talk this year at Quo Vadis, and that's one reason it was approved, because it showed off the machine. And the other reason was they didn't market it as an educational game, because parents said they wanted educational games, but if you said it was educational, you didn't sell as many copies. It is a contradiction. Yes, we want educational games, but non-educational. So they didn't say it was educational, but parents looked at it, teachers looked at it and said, oh, this is like an educational game. The box didn't say education, but families thought that. Reporters, reviewers saw the educational value. So the Consumer Electronics Show, beginning of 1982, back in those days, you finished a game and it was 5 months before your game would ship, because they had to take it, manufacture it, test manufacturing, and then go manufacture regular copies, get enough of them, bring them back. So you waited 5 months after you were finished. So I finished the game, I think on my wife's birthday, or right near my wife's birthday, near the end of 1981. And then, so it was shown at the Consumer Electronics Show in January of '82. And people seemed to react well. So the second morning of the show, my wife calls me at the hotel as I'm getting ready to go to the show. And she said, you may not believe this, but your game is on the front page of the entertainment section of the Los Angeles Times. So of all the games at the show, it was the one that got the most coverage. So what we thought of as here's something that will be different, it will be to balance the line, turned out to get the most notoriety of any of the new Intellivision games from that year, and sold very well. And you wouldn't have thought so with a strategy game like that, but that's the story of Utopia and where it came from. All the little strange coincidences that created Utopia.
Great story. Yeah, then let's jump some years. So you have had several employments at EA, but then you founded your own company, Stormfront Studios. So what was the reason why you founded your own company?
I think that entrepreneurs in the games business, there's a pattern many of us have followed. We get to where we think we really understand the industry and we know how to do this right. We know how to develop games right. And so we found game companies and game development companies. And then we learn how much we have to learn. And even after working in the industry for years, you realize, oh wow, when you're running a company, there's all these new things to learn. So the story I always share when I'm teaching and mentoring and when I'm advising teams is that we have to remember that understanding games is not enough. Understanding the games industry is not enough. Running a business is in fact a game. It's a very complex, a very challenging game. And I started out thinking, oh, I know all of these things. But then you have the humbling and sometimes humiliating moment of realizing I have so much to learn.
But you had time, 20 years. When you operated Stormfront Studios, you had big hits like Neverwinter Nights or Stronghold. So somehow you learned your lessons, and everything developed well, nevertheless. after 20 years, Stormfront Studios were closed.
Mm-hmm.
So why happened that?
In 2008, two things happened. We felt like we were doing very, very well, and we were, because we had a very large AAA console game for a big publisher that we were working on, original IP, what every game developer wants. Big AAA game, original story. We co-owned the story with the publisher. We had developed it together with them. So a lot of design freedom for our team to work on the game, a large budget. And so it felt like this wonderful time, even though the economy in the United States was going very badly, we felt we were in a wonderful time. Well, one thing we know from games and from history is just when you think everything is predictable, it stops being predictable. Our publisher was acquired by another company. And the publisher was acquired because the company buying them wanted some of their current titles. They didn't want anything new. They wanted current titles. So every game that wasn't going to ship in the next 90 days when the deal closed was terminated, and the contract was closed off. We had $20 million in business walk out of the studio in 10 days. And at that point, we had spent a lot of money proposing and getting the project approved, and we'd used up a lot of the company's reserves getting this perfect project. And we looked at the numbers and we said, there is no time and no way for us to get another big project. And we just have to say this is the end of the company.
Yeah.
So that's how it happened.
Which publisher, can you tell which publisher it was?
Because of the contract.
Which one was the buyer of the original publisher?
Because of the contracts,
right.
I can't talk about it. Students of history can go back and figure it out. But because of the contracts, I'm bound by honor not to explicitly say it. So.
Right.
And in fact, the publisher we were working with, it wasn't their fault. It was one of those things of the way business is done.
Okay, coming to the last two questions. So, what would you say if you if you would focus one major development? So, which one you would point out where you would say that was very important for the games industry and makes it easier to develop interesting and important games.
Mm-hmm.
So what benefited the games industry? So I know that there's a lot of milestones, but maybe there's one you want to point us at.
I think it's actually the strand that connects the milestones that is the thing that is the most critical. And that is that the games industry is constantly changing. It never holds still. So what that means is there are always new ways to do things. There's always new kinds of platforms for which we can create games. There's new technology to support. There are needs to learn new ways to build games, both in terms of creative crafts, in terms of the art of game development, and also the technology, new languages to learn. We started out doing assembly languages, and then we tried different kinds of structured languages like Forth, and we had games in Pascal, lots of games in BASIC. Then we find ourselves going, and then C appears and becomes important, but then for speed you would go back to assembly language. So nothing stays the same for very long. So the English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley has this line that says, "Naught endures but mutability," which means in modern English, nothing lasts very long without changing. The only thing that we can depend on is change. And the fact that you have that constant change also means the people in the games industry, we have to keep reinventing ourselves. So the technology people are inventing new technology, but to keep working in games, we have to keep reinventing ourselves, learning new machines, methods, ideas, new kinds of games, new audiences, new business models. That is the strand that holds each pearl of each milestone of game history. is that constant and unavoidable, unescapable change. And you either surrender to change as a game developer and become a creature of change who floats and navigates on those seas. Because if you try to be on dry land, you can't be in the games industry on dry land. And if you look at each string of pearls as an historian, you know all these milestones. The only thing that connects them all, other than interactivity and audience, the only thing that connects them all is the steady pattern of change. So to me, it is the change itself that is the most important thing.
Okay, but that's also something which was there all the time, this constant change. But isn't there one development which puts everything on another level, which makes it easier for developing games, something which makes a difference between now and earlier times?
I think that if you ask people that question every 5 years, they will keep giving you different answers. And having done this for almost 50 years, I don't see any one thing, because it's always for us, we become fascinated with the last change. The last change. So now, if we look at today, and we talked in the games community, this is Berlin Games Week. We have so many game developers in Berlin this week. If you ask them, they will all tell you different things. These are the big changes. Some will say VR is the big change that's coming. It's changing everything. It will never be the same. AR, it will never be the same because of AR. The spread of mobile phones to the developing world, taking the size of our potential audience and doubling it in the next few years, that will broaden and diversify our audience. It will change games forever. All of them are probably right, but not just one of them. So that's why after almost 50 years, I never see one diamond hanging from the necklace. I only see strands of pearls, and more pearls come onto the strand with time.
Okay, I understand. And maybe this is also your answer to the very last question, which somehow is the same thing, same question like before, but with the different twist. So, do you think that it might, or do you see challenges for the game developers of today, which hasn't been there before in the earlier times? To give you an example, maybe free-to-play games.
Yeah.
That is something pretty new, which came to us 10 years ago, something like that. On the one hand, of course, it's great for players, at least if you look to the surface. But on the other hand, I can imagine that it's really a limitation for the freedom of developers, because the business model is so much involved into game mechanics that such a limitation is today really a challenge, whereas it hasn't been there in earlier times because free-to-play wasn't invented back then. So would you agree, or maybe you can tell it a little bit in your own words, or you see something different than free-to-play, which makes it more challenging for developers of today compared to developers of earlier times?
I think there is very clearly, I think you're right, one of the things that makes it more difficult and challenging is that there are so many different business models. Most of game history, we had basically one way to sell games. You finished your game, you put it on a cartridge or on a disc, you made copies of those, and then they were sold in stores. And the console business and the PC games business, what we now call PC games, had a lot of differences, but they were basically that similar retail model. Once online came in and the model started to change, if you've only worked one way for years in an industry, new models are difficult. In the beginning of online games, when we started working on online in 1987, people were paying $6 in the US, $6 an hour to play our games. So they were playing by the minute, 10 cents a minute to play a game. And I remember thinking, wait, if a big game might be $35, if you play for 6 hours, you've spent as much money as if you had bought a big game. And then we're reading on the discussion boards, people saying, well, in Neverwinter Nights, I spent $600 last month. And the first time I ever read this, I just went, $600 on a game in 1 month? It's probably going to be worse next month. I'm going to spend more. And I'm thinking, and it was good for us in the sense that it was our game that we had built in teamwork with Quantum, which later became America Online. But we realized this is just this whole new world. And then, of course, the internet begins. And we start to get different business models from that. But you have to, again, just take everything you know. If you do a different business model, we have these feelings both as consumers. How do we buy games? How do we keep games? I love to buy a game, take the box home. You very carefully open it. You take good care of the box. You play the game. When you're finished, at least for a little while, you take the game, you put it very carefully back in the box. You put the box on your shelf. Your friends come over to your house to see you. Even if you're not playing games, if you're talking about games, they see your games on the shelf. You talk about your collection. They talk about their collection. Well, with online, there's no shelf, there's no box, there's no game. And now we have developed our online persona. We have badges. We have names. We have the publicizing of our accomplishments. And so, which the different companies do in different ways. But that metaphor still doesn't work the same way as a box on a shelf. And so, I think one of the great challenges is, number one, does a game designer want to open their vista beyond the box on the shelf? There are still boxes on shelves. Will there always be boxes on shelves? As a game player, I always want a box on a shelf because I've been playing games so long. I'm used to that. I like that world. That's my world. But as a game creator, I have to recognize that there are all these other ways that people experience and enjoy games. And they are very happy enjoying games that way. And we have many more potential players than we have ever had in the almost 50 years I've been doing games. So it is this challenge of saying, I like it this way, but other people like it that way. I can either serve them or not. I think it's like being a chef who runs a steakhouse, and more people in your town are becoming vegetarians. And you have to say, am I only going to serve steak, or am I going to add vegetarian dishes to my restaurant? It's some of these same challenges. If you've become famous creating steak, it's not natural to want to create vegetarian dishes. For me, I like trying new things, so I have always chosen those new choices. But for some people it's very difficult, and I have great respect for that, but because they are coming from a place that's driven by their art. I deeply believe that at our best, what we do is an art form. And if somebody as an artist is committed to this way of expressing their work, it isn't just a business. It isn't just saying, hey, look, you want to make money, you got to go do this, you got to go do that if you want to make money. Right, but art isn't just about money. Part of art is making a living doing art, and that's about money. But part of art is the statement you are making, the experience you are creating for the audience, the way you want the audience to feel. It's what writers are taught. It's what actors are taught. It's what painters are taught. It's what sculptors are taught. What feeling? If we communicate just an idea, it is lost. It's ephemeral. The audience forgets an idea tomorrow. If you create a feeling, an emotion in the audience that resonates with their own lives, now we've held the mirror up to life. Now we're creating art. Where in that are we going, you could make more money if you did it this way? That doesn't feel like art. So in the business, for those of us who make a living out of, at our best, creating art, there's always this tension between the business of making a living at creating art, and for many people that's their business. They're selling games, they're selling paintings, they're selling movies. And then the artistic statement, and how do you balance those things? La Boheme, Rent, different operas and musicals, just about this idea of what do you do for art and what don't you do for art, and what are the consequences of what you do for art. We have our own struggle now with that. I think that's the greatest challenge, and ironically, it's not really about technology. It's about our view of ourselves and how we want to communicate, interact, and connect with our audience. Because ultimately, I think for so many game designers, the goal isn't just to entertain, it's to connect. It's to create that feeling where if you ever meet that person, they want to tell you, oh, I played your game and this is when we were playing it. They never tell us, oh, it's important because level 5, oh, I loved level 5, you balanced level 5, the challenge so well. I have never been praised for a level 5 in my entire life by a game player. What they will tell us is they'll say, this is when I played your game, this is who I played with. I still remember it, and this is why I remember it. And because I remember, it's important to me, and I love talking to you about the game because you made something important to me. That's the moment you know you made art. So how do we do that? That is the challenge in an increasingly complex world of both art and business, technology and media, changing business models, changing ways in which we connect with people, and constant change.
Wow, Don, thanks very much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us. I'm really glad and honored that you have been here, and hope to see you soon again.
This is, it's wonderful to have the chance to be here and to see the museum and talk with you, and it's great fun and also an honor to be here with you.